For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. In 2011, Tom Sterlacci made history when he was awarded the first cannabis license issued in the United States.
First, from the city and county of Denver, the first license to Dr. J's.
You know, out of all of the firsts that I've had in my 40 years of working in corporate America, I never achieved something that was so nationally and internationally recognized as that first license after 80 years of prohibition.
On January 1st, 2014, at 8:03 a.m., Tom sold the very first legally purchased cannabis edible in the United States. Tom says that being chosen was humbling and exciting, but it was also pretty frightening.
They went back to my grade school report cards and everything in between, every financial thing, every school I went to. I could have been wearing a pair of handcuffs just as easily as could have been wearing a pair of underwear. I mean, it was that scary.
Today, we're talking with Tom Sterlacci, the very first licensed cannabis business owner, about his experiences in the early days of the cannabis industry. Tom, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, Jesse, it's my pleasure. I've heard a lot about you, and I was looking forward to this time.
For a lot of people, this story starts with you acquiring your license. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing with these interviews is actually beginning the conversation a little bit before, because people have lived such varied and different lives and careers before getting into cannabis. So I'd love to start, a few years back. Who was Tom Sterlacci before getting into cannabis?
So Tom Sterlacci spent 40 years in the high-tech automation industry. He sold software. The thing about Tom is I really enjoyed being on the cutting edge of things. Whatever the next technology is going to be, that's where I jumped to. And the reason I did that was because I love the unknown. That's where my passion is. And so I moved from computer-aided design, when nobody knew what CAD stood for, to computer-aided engineering, to computer telephony interaction, integration, IVR. I was even doing speech recognition 25 years ago, which is kind of interesting considering today, you know, everybody knows who Alexa is and who Hey Google is. Think about 25 years ago, how new we were in that. So after 40 years of being in corporate America, I, of course, had a snout full of that, and there's a lot of people out there listening to this who will understand exactly where I was at. So I left, and I said, what's new? What's happening? What's cutting edge? I literally opened up two companies. I opened up an ulterior energy company and a cannabis company. Once I got the first license, legal license to produce and distribute cannabis products after 80 years of prohibition, well, that company took on a life of its own.
I would be a fool not to ask a little bit more about your snout full of corporate America. Why was cannabis the cutting edge that was more attractive to you than building what many would argue is, you know, a fairly revolutionary technology?
It was very revolutionary 25 years ago. But once we reached a certain point of technology, it was now old news to Tom. It was, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, wore it out, threw it out.
And what about cannabis excited you specifically?
It was brand new. It was never done before. It was to go where no man has gone before. That was the drive for me to once again go somewhere. I don't want to read the book of how somebody did something. I want to write the book of how it was done.
And with cannabis specifically, what was your kind of attitude prior to this?
Well, it was a part of my past. And at one point I thought, oh, I'm never going to stop smoking pot. But as I moved up the ranks in the high technology world, I kind of put the marijuana on the back burner. I wasn't a user for decades. And it's an interesting story. My first product was, believe it or not, lasagna, which people find really interesting.
I was absolutely going to ask about that. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Jay's hash-infused lasagna, and that idea came up with me and a friend one night, sitting at a bar saying, well, what's not in the marijuana business? There's candy, and there's brownies, and there's this, and there's not entrees. So it literally started Dr. J's hash-infused lasagna. And that was being made in my kitchen legally, but it was prior to House Bill 1284, which basically turned on the medical marijuana industry in Colorado.
Wow. Yeah, I people talk a lot about the, early days of the cannabis industry. It's just an absolute cliche at this point as the Wild West. I do want to ask you about that that permit process. And as you mentioned, you are the first ever license holder. Let's just start with the obvious question. How did it feel to receive that license?
Well, it was a surprise, and it was a very, very high honor to me. Out of all of the firsts that I've had in my 40 years of working in corporate America, I never achieved something that was so nationally and internationally recognized as that first license after 80 years of prohibition. I will tell you this, the Marijuana Enforcement Division did a very deep dive into who you are, your finances, where you came from. I literally have a backpack that's about 40 pounds of paper, which is all of the documentation I needed to put into my application. They went back to my grade school report cards and everything in between, every financial thing, every school I went to, every credit card, everything. They did such a deep dive because it was important for them to know that this was not cartel money. So you got to remember, Colorado was the first, and it was really important for them to not give award a license to somebody, and 2 weeks later have that person on the front page of the Denver Post in handcuffs. At any time, even for years, I could have been wearing a pair of handcuffs just as easily as could have been wearing a pair of underwear. It was that scary, and it was the function of the industry at the time. We were all taking a risk. I didn't have a storefront, although I did have a kitchen lab.
And so did you perceive it as a risk? Did you feel like you were kind of putting something on the line by entering?
Only my entire 40-year career if it didn't work out.
Wow. Tell me a little bit about that decision-making process. It's my guess that as someone who enjoys cutting edge and newness, that you also are not necessarily afraid of risks. But what went into making this one?
Well, I could explain it this easily. Once I got to the point where this was becoming a reality, I had to make that decision. Tom, if you take another step down this path, chances of you going back into your high-tech software solutions world is probably not going to be possible again. So I decided to damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, and why not? You only have one life to live. You might as well live it as fully as possible.
So this might be a slightly out of order question, but did you suffer any repercussions from entering the industry? And if so, in what way?
I really did not suffer any professional repercussions because I never did go back to the software industry.
Hmm.
I mean, I suffered as much as every pioneer suffers because pioneers get arrows in their back. We've all met some pretty hard challenges. Yeah. And if you didn't get, jerked around at least twice, you really never were in the industry because the the amount of unscrupulous actors in this industry was tremendous. I think that we've done a lot back in those days to help to validate the industry, to validate the power of the plant, and to validate the fact that it's something that people want and people need, and yet it needs to be done in a way to where people are also safe. And that did not happen overnight. In the early days, we were dealing with medicine, and we had patience. And those were the words that were on the lips of every pioneer in this industry as we were trying to transition from counterculture to mainstream. That's so far downstream, even though it was only a little over a decade ago, from the people today that they don't really they don't have an understanding for what a challenge that was for us.
Can you expound a little bit about maybe some of the challenges there?
Well, yeah. I mean, think about organizations like, oh, I don't know, the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, Mothers Against Drug Drivers, churches, ministers. I mean, it was an uphill battle to validate the fact that this wasn't not just drugs we're talking about here, but we truly were talking about medicine, which I knew this ever since I had attended a conference down in Tucson called Patients at a Time. And I realized that, wow, this stuff heals people. Doesn't heal everything, doesn't heal everyone, but the potential is there. And I was lucky enough to get to hear from doctors and scientists from all different countries from around the world because, as we all remember, it was illegal in the United States of America. Therefore, the knowledge was coming from other countries. And it was mind-boggling, the things I learned, the capabilities of this. The cannabis plant has over 400 elements, and we don't even know what a small percentage of them can do.
What were some of the reactions when you first proposed what you were going to be doing, and also after you kind of got your permit? Did you get reactions from people in your local area?
Yeah, mostly from the bankers.
Well, tell me about that.
Get out.
Really? What exactly did that look like?
Well, let's put it to you this way. I had a bank that I was banking with for 30 some years. And the local people knew who I was. They knew I was Dr. J. That's the name they gave me over one of my companies, Dr. J's. And the local people were fine with it. Once corporate found out, I was immediately cut off from the bank. What was really difficult was they wouldn't give me access to all of my documentation. And I was pretty much a paper trail guy because I was on the up and up, and everything I did was in checks and payments and things like that. And I had to start going to different banks. Well, the strategy became I used to play musical banks. That means that at any one given time, I had 4 banks.
Wow.
4 accounts that were open. So if one bank discovered that I was in the cannabis industry and shut me down, I can still continue to do my business without much of a hiccup by transferring, to another bank. And that was pretty much, you had to do it that way There was no other way to do it. And thank God, and I mean this, thank God none of my mortgages were with any of the banks that I was doing business with, because it would have been really hard for me to have them pull my mortgages.
And you think that would have happened?
Why not? They wouldn't let me do a personal checking account after 30 some years of doing business. I said, well, can I just do my personal business here? And they said, no, we don't want your business at all.
Wow. And of course, the cost there is not only, you know, an operational interruption with your inability to necessarily process payments or you know, but like there's a security aspect to this too when you're handling that much cash, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and you know, when cash sits around too long, some of it evaporates by miraculously. It goes away.
Early in this new industry, there were a lot of, for lack of a better term, unscrupulous players.
Sure.
And I'd love to kind of get some sense of perhaps some of the lessons that you've learned, you know, surviving through the early days.
All right. Well, I'll give you a couple of short snapshots of things that I saw happen. I saw a guy walk up to a business he just bought for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And as he went there to get the keys to the building, it was a dispensary, the police showed up and pulled the license of that business he just bought. The people who sold him the business were losing their license. They failed to mention that in the transaction. You know, another example was, you would not believe, Jesse, how many people got their businesses stolen from them. Stolen from them. One good friend of mine had a business partner who came in and within 2 years took the entire business that this woman started. I'm not going to mention any names because she's pretty well known out there and still in the industry. I know a couple of sisters. Again, I'm not dropping names here. They had a business. It was an amazing business. They were doing some incredible work. They probably had the most sophisticated, complete database on cures and on dosaging and things like that of anybody in the state of Colorado. And they had gotten some seed money at one point to help grow the business of $50,000. And in a short period of time, that person took the entire business, which was worth millions, for the $50,000 loan. And
oh my God.
It was a matter of who has more money to pay for lawyers. And it was, I mean, I can go on and on and on with the stories, but it's so sad when I see people who are excited about getting into this industry. Let's face it, we're only at the embryonic stages still of the industry. It's going to grow to be billions and trillions of dollars. These people are excited. They have passion, even their best intentions. They get hooked up with some con people who are unscrupulous, who will take advantage of them, who are opportunists. And because these innocent people and somewhat ignorant, they don't know what they don't know, they'll go down the path. And you know what they say, a fool and their money are soon parted. And they'll find out that they now have lost their money, lost their friends, and sometimes their family, because a lot of times people get investments from their friends and families. And this was done by unscrupulous actors, opportunists, who I call cannabaggers. Part of what I do, I mean, now that I sold all 4 of my successful cannabis businesses, and I do some work as a consultant, helping people to basically navigate this industry, to show them where the potholes are. And I'll be honest with people, if it doesn't make sense, if they don't have a winning plan, I would be more than happy to tell them come up with a new plan or find something else to do with your money and your time, because you're just going to be playing at this and you're going to be losing this money. I've seen people lose literally millions of dollars in months, literally.
Wow.
So it's good to not try to reinvent a wheel and watch your pipe dreams go up in smoke.
You yourself didn't do everything, perfectly. I'm sure you made some mistakes along the way. Are there any like lessons that you tend to impart to people, things that you would, feel comfortable sharing here?
Here's a high level one. And this lesson comes from the great hockey player, Wayne Gretzky. A good hockey player plays where the puck is. A great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be. Now, how does that apply to the cannabis industry? This is how it applies. If you have an idea for a product or a service, either you have something that no one has thought about, which is not typically the case, but it does happen on occasion. You want to make sure you're not trying to get into a market space or a market segment that is all saturated. Because if you try to get into that market segment, you're going to need a tremendous amount of capital to get brand recognition. And basically what that means is you got to give away a lot of stuff. And sometimes, and how we are so evolved in the Colorado market, a lot of companies need to buy shelf space. Okay, so if you want to get into a part of the industry that is saturated, well, the guys who are in the industry are at a point of critical mass, meaning that they have enough business they buy larger quantities of everything from the cannabis medicine that goes into their products to their packaging to their advertising. I mean, you've got to go and compete against all that. That's a real hard uphill, upstream battle. Now, if you were to look at something to where this is where the industry is going, these are the products that are going to be more desirable in the future, and you start building a smart plan to work that, your opportunity for success is huge.
It sounds like you're saying that you really need to prepare, and having a clear plan in place that's not only going to set you apart from your competition, but puts you into, like you said, a market that's not oversaturated. That requires a lot of thought. So how do you build a business plan when you don't necessarily know whether or not you're going to be approved or how many licenses you might get? It seems to me like there's a lot of unknowns in a process that always includes unknowns, but perhaps has more in this particular case. Does that ring true? And what advice do you have for that?
Absolutely true, Jesse. A very good perspective of you to pick that up, because you just mentioned the easy unknowns. Okay, will I get a license? How many licenses can I get? Can I find a building? I mean, all of that stuff. A lot of times you can hire somebody who has been there, done that. Sometimes lawyers, sometimes pioneers who are not still running corporations to be in the business. And you need to not try to reinvent the wheel. You need to try, and not to think, oh, I can do this. Because there's so many unknowns that aren't even obvious, like licensing. Do I get one or don't I get one? There's a lot of don't know what you don't know in this business. And that's where the gotchas are. That's where the companies fail, because they thought about something from, let's say, A to F, but not to A to P or Z. They haven't thought it through far enough down the path. And I have seen this so many times where a customer or a client will come to me and has this great idea and just be all over it. And they've got prototypes and they've got, $50, $80, $150,000 invested, and they're going to bring this thing to market. Product, perhaps. And I look at that product and I kind of scrunch my eyebrow a little bit, and of course want to know, well, what's that look supposed to mean? And I said, well, did you think about this? No. Did you think about this? No. Did you put your head into did you put yourself in the shoes of the owner of the dispensary that you want to move the product and say, my product competes with something they're already selling? Is your prototype take up too much very valuable geography in the store? How big is your packaging? I mean, this is all stuff that people don't think about, and yet it makes a lot of sense because there's so many competing for that extremely valuable geography, shelf space, display counter space. You'd be surprised at how hard it is to get it. In fact, a lot of new startup companies have got to pay for that space, which is all well and good if you've got, deep pockets. But it is not a sustainable solution.
I suppose the last question for you is, does cannabis still feel new to you? And do you think that this will hold interest for you for a while, or will you move on to other things?
Quite frankly, I am doing this part-time right now. I only want a limited set of clients because I've achieved so much in my career that, I'm not driven that way like I used to be. I sound young on the phone, but I'm not as young as I sound. I know that. Plus, I have a love interest now, possibly the love of my life, and that's going to be my next major project and investment of my time and energy.
Oh, that's really fantastic. Tom Sterlacci is the founder of Cannabis One Consulting. Tom, that's really wonderful, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your story with us, and I just invite you to come back anytime you have more to share.
Well, it's been real fun, Jesse, and I would like to make an offer to your listening audience, and I would be willing to spend 20 minutes on the phone doing a consult. If they have an idea or if they're up against some challenges, I would do that totally for free because I've enjoyed this interview so much, and I really would like to help people.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground at TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The show is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend, and thank you for listening.